All right. It is a beautiful Friday here in the Rocky Mountains. I have one of my neighbors, kind of neighbors here. Neighbor now, when I think when we met, you were in Houston, Deanna, and you migrated up north to Denver, right?
I did about 2 years ago.
Love it. Love it. So yes, we are technically neighbors now. And this is one of those podcasts, I swear, we've been trying to get you on for a couple of years. And then finally it worked out. First you moved, and then I think I had some sort of challenging conflict. You had a challenging conflict. We're both busy. Finally made it happen today, so I'm super excited about that. We're going to get into all things in the world of Deanna Zhang, all things in the world of energy tech, investment, Yale, life, career, Houston, Denver. It's going to be a blast. But of course, I got to hit you with the question I ask everybody to start the podcast is, who are you? Who is Deanna Zhang?
I am many things.
Let's hear it.
But first and foremost, I guess, on the what I do aspect, which, by the way, changes a lot when you move from Houston to Colorado.
Yes.
I was just talking with a friend about this the other day, but when you're in Houston, what do you do is obviously your job. And then when you're in Colorado, what do you do is like, what do you ski?
Yeah.
What do you hike? That sort of thing. But yeah, no, for me, so in terms of what I do for work, I right now, and since really the last year and a half, have been consulting around first of a kind. So I help companies in energy tech and climate tech raise money around their first of a kind projects. And that can be anything from pilot to demonstration to second demonstration to first commercial, which is probably what most people think of when they think of first of a kind. But the gap, the missing middle that we always talk about in climate tech and energy transition is across all of those things. And so that's why I work across all of those areas. What I do outside of work, we in part moved to Colorado because we just love the skiing, the mountain stuff, the weather, just everything to do around this area. And we also have a little corgi that I take out.
Nice.
Every day, and she's a hiker and a mountain dog too.
You are truly a Coloradan now.
Yeah.
Right? When I met you, it was doing, being an analyst, looking at climate tech, energy tech companies. Now you just want to talk about where you go skiing. Like I've joked about this before. In Houston, what do? You sit in a car, and in Colorado, you sit on chairlifts, right?
Yeah.
So that's always a positive. I want to go back though. I want to talk about like where'd you grow up? Where are you from? You went to Yale, so you went to school in the Northeast. That's like my home as well. Originally from New Hampshire and college in Boston. But talk a little bit about your upbringing, what you studied in college, and how you got on this path that led you into oil and gas, climate tech, energy tech.
Yeah, so I grew up in Houston. I am a Houstonian. And I would modify that last statement a little bit. I would say that in Houston, we sit in restaurants and we eat. So I grew up just spoiled rotten by all the food that Houston has to offer.
The best.
But I grew up in Southwest Houston around Chinatown, actually. I lived with my parents and my grandpa, who spoke no English and got around just fine in that area, which was amazing. And my parents eventually moved to Bel Air. I went to school at St. John's, went to high school at St. John's, and then went to Yale for college. And that was my great escape from Houston, which was shared by most of my classmates at the time.
Nice.
Which was, if you, to get out of Houston and to explore the world and everything. And so I wanted to pick a school that was obviously part of my top list, but also very far away from Houston, just to see what another type of life was like, and got it, and then decided after college that I really liked Houston and came
Hmm.
back. So
That's
yeah,
interesting. So yeah, are you Chinese? Is that your
I am. Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
That's your descent. I hear this with some Chinese American families where it's like the family lives together, right? You mentioned grandparent, and parents. It's kind of cool. I think I've heard this before, and that familial aspect, especially I find that interesting that your parents didn't speak any English. Were they first generation in the US?
Yeah, my parents were first generation, and they spoke English, so they came here for school and work. But my grandpa never learned English. Like
Hmm.
he spoke with us, and then he would venture out on his own. You know, probably against my dad's wishes. He'd venture out on his own in the middle of the day, cross like the busy Bel Air Boulevard that was there in Chinatown, and go shopping by himself. And he because the community there is just it's enough. He could go to the library there. He
Yeah.
could spend his whole day there and not speak a word English and be fine.
Was education like really instilled in you? I mean, first of all, you have no accent whatsoever. No like hint of a Chinese accent. Certainly no hint of a Houston accent. So I'm guessing you grew up bilingual, right? Was it like a priority for your family to have you like really master the English language, kind of immerse yourself in the American culture? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, yeah. So, since I was born here, I think I benefited from being surrounded by English from a very early age. And my parents also, since they, had to work in English, their English was pretty good enough to where if I spoke to them in English, they would understand.
Hmm.
So I kind of grew up uh, not speaking Chinese too well, but understanding it fine because my parents spoke it. But then responding to my parents in English. So we would have this weird,
Yeah.
like dynamic where they would speak to me in Chinese and I would speak back in English, and that's just how it was for most of my life. And as a result, my Chinese is actually pretty horrible.
That's
um,
funny.
but but I can get around just fine because I can understand, and I can I know enough words to where I can get my meaning across, and I can use hand gestures and all this stuff to get around. But yeah, growing up was very easy from that aspect. I didn't have any language issues, unlike I know other kids that came from overseas and had to assimilate from when they were 12 years old and only
Right.
speaking Chinese up until that point. I know I have friends that have done that have had to make that drastic transition when they were in middle school, which is a hard time enough as it is,
Totally.
and then end up just fine by the time they were 18.
Yeah, that's cool. I appreciate hearing that perspective because for me, grew up speaking English, and any languages that I picked up along the way were through school, right? Um, so Yale, obviously one of the best schools in the country. Maybe you feel like it's the best school in the country. What was it like going to an Ivy League school? I mean, obviously you had to get a winter coat, which you certainly don't ever need in Houston. So that was a little bit different. But did you like Yale? What'd you study there? And did you in general, like, did you get chances to go to Boston and New York and kind of see that whole like Northeast corridor as well?
Yeah, yeah, I loved it, and it was definitely very different for a lot of reasons. College is very different from growing up, but Yale especially, it was in the Northeast. Like all the buildings are just so different
Yeah.
from those in Houston, um, and the people are the same. Like I think everybody there's nice people everywhere, and there were nice people in college. There's also assholes in college too,
Oh yeah,
everywhere.
yeah, yeah, no doubt.
But I found a core group at Yale that I still keep in touch with to this day. We actually just had a reunion at a friend's wedding. Um, and I think like one thing that I noticed across like generally Ivy Leagues, um, and in particular at Yale, is that there's kids are smart, but kids, you can find smart kids everywhere, right? I think when it comes to these like kind of elitist colleges, there's sort of an expectation that you not only like, you know, make a good life out of yourself, but also that you go out and change the world of some sort. Like
Yeah.
you go out and try to do something bigger, and so kids come in kind of with these like lofty ideals, for better or worse. And I have a ton of friends that are like this. That I love them for that, but it also kind of creates a separation between them uh, and the folks that are making good lives out of themselves by doing everyday jobs. And so there's always like some sort of like moral aspect of like is what you're doing impactful, is what you're doing like good for the world, is what you're doing like um making the best out of the life that you've been given. And all these like philosophical questions like entered into everyday conversation way more than it did with some of my other friends back home. So that was kind of an interesting thing to note, and it probably is part of the reason why there's like a big, and maybe this is true across all college campuses, but there's a lot of debate about social justice, around
Yes.
environmental justice, around clean energy versus dirty energy, versus like what our world should look like, and got me thinking earlier on about those questions.
I love that insight. And I see that a little bit too with my wife. She went to Duke. I went to Brandeis, and I think there's some of that, but it's a little bit, it's a little bit different. I think that the ethos of Brandeis was like, you're going to go here and then you're going to go to some form of secondary education and probably end up in a big city and figure out what you're going to do. I think with Duke at least, and probably to the same extent Yale, when you're in that like top 7, top 10, top 3, whatever school, um, there is that thought of like, okay, how can I not only uphold the brand, but like really see how I can impact and change the world, right? So that ideal of thinking big is awesome, and I think that it's good for our country as a whole. What did you major in college?
Statistics.
Statistics. Okay, so were you always good at math? Do you love numbers?
Yeah, I've always been good at math, because I think math for me is also it's less about you immediately know math. It's logic, right? Like you
Yeah.
can figure it out if you just spend enough time with it. And so I've always been good at math, just because I've always worked hard. I've
Yeah.
always just worked at it. But statistics was interesting. Okay, so full disclosure, I in part chose statistics because it was like 9 credits, and so it was one of the lighter majors, and I could
Nice.
take other interesting classes to fill my schedule other than like major requirements. But also because it was widely applicable. Like you could you could turn statistics into really any subject.
Yeah.
Statistics applies to everything. So I really like that aspect, and the sort of like academic mind that I had at the time was thinking, if I understand statistics, I understand nuance, and if I understand nuance, like I understand how to explain a lot of unknown, like a lot of the unknown, a lot of the gray areas
Hmm.
Across different subjects, and maybe I can be a better thinker as a result. Um, but yeah, I would say it also, from a tactical perspective, benefited me because I learned how to code as part of learning statistics.
Wow.
And not like I'm not creating websites or anything like that, but
Sure.
we used R a lot in statistics, and it gave me a good flavor for just how you put together some sort of algorithm to do something of use. and that's been helpful later on in life.
Yeah, that's neat. I mean, now I'm because we're talking about college. Like now I'm going down my own personal rabbit hole in my mind a little bit. I was a history major and actually double majored in history and American studies, which was an accident. I was an American studies major, and apparently to be a history major, you only needed 8 history classes, and so many classes were like marked as both American studies and history. So I
Uh-huh.
sort of found out like halfway through my first semester senior year, I just sort of like started counting. I'm like, I think I'm a history major also, you know? And I like spoke to
Love that.
the head of the history department. He's like, yeah, I mean, you've taken 9 classes. You only needed 8. So congrats, you double majored. But like thinking about why I liked history, I think I was never a great student. I was a good student. I worked hard. I don't think things came quite as easy for me as they did for others um, at my university. But I have a good memory and a good memory for like times, places, people, and things. And I think that's why history was interesting to me. And things like economics and statistics, not quite as much, right? Because yes, it's more practical and applicable to the real world, but maybe it just didn't give me like that same feeling that something like history did. Did you have any other classes that you loved? You mentioned like you did statistics because in some ways it was a lighter major. Did you have some other types of classes that really stood out to you that you loved?
I loved. I actually was the opposite. I wasn't too big of a fan of history
Huh.
per se because I have a horrible memory, and like if I don't find it immediately applicable to what I'm doing right now,
Yeah.
I find it hard to stay interested. So, like my husband loves war movies and everything to do with historical wars. I just can't find myself interested in that unless it has something to do with my life right now.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, in college, I spent a lot in spent a lot of time in the science labs too. Took a lot of biology, chemistry, and it was part of this. I really wanted to just be able to explain things, like
Yeah.
you know, statistics was part of that, but I wanted to explain like how we think, how our bodies worked, and why does this happen when this happens, and like science helped with that. Um, I also took some classes that were more artsy in nature. This was one history class that I took, which was on the art movement, futurism, and
Mm.
it was one of those classes where the professor is just so passionate about their subject that we had crazy classes like a one like potluck that he did where we were to make futurist dishes
Oh,
using a
cool.
futurist cookbook and bring them to class. That's one of the most memorable classes that I've had. But I also really enjoyed art for those reasons. Like um, I think art has a way of like explaining your life, explaining why things happen,
Sure.
and jumping forward ahead of science, um, that science doesn't get to do because everything has to be precise and accurate and stepwise. Um, so I also enjoyed those classes.
No, that's cool. No, good insight. Learning more about you. So you finish up at Yale, right? You graduate. You move back to Houston. Did you know what you wanted to do? Like, what was your first job? It's a bit of a homecoming for you. You got this great education. You kind of want to go out and change the world a little bit. You've learned a lot of different things. What was the plan, and what did you do for like your first job out of college?
Yeah, so I joined GPH out of college, and I had an interest in banking from starting from like probably sophomore year, which is when everybody starts to think about recruiting,
Yep,
which now is like the middle of recruiting for banking, which is really crazy.
that's
But
early. So you got kids who are like 19 years old, ready to like get ready for their career.
yeah, yeah. No, I mean these days it's crazy. Like these days you pretty much have to be like at the end of your freshman year knowing that you want to go into
Oh my
banking or
god,
recruit for
I had
that
no
internship.
clue what I wanted to do at that age.
but back then, I had joined this personal finance club called Smart Women Securities. It was also targeting like women, and it
Mhm.
was a great network of women, many of whom have grown up to be friends of mine and that I still keep in touch with today. But yeah, so I joined that club to learn more about just stock investing and what is this thing that people do, because that was something I never. My dad kind of dabbled, but um, he I didn't really learn any of that, so I really wanted to learn that going into college, and then found that there's this whole set of career paths that I didn't really even know existed, that came out of the space, and so I recruited for banking after I learned a little bit more about, you were in the middle of big deals and you're out changing the world one deal at a time and things like that, like the whole idealist mentality around banking that you can have as a college student, and then landed an internship with Barclays in New York
Cool.
in the chemicals group, and then that kind of was my foray into the world of energy and chemicals and big industrials. And the chemicals group at Barclays was a subset of the natural resources group. And it was pretty well known at the time that the chemicals group worked on a pretty niche space on a few big players in the chemicals industry. But the natural resources group was like really where a bunch of like really exciting big deals happened. And so I started to think more about like the energy industry as a whole, and maybe specializing in energy off of that. And I took a few classes at Yale too, but just ended up recruiting for TPH, um, because I had heard great things from a couple of folks that I knew that had interned there, um, and yeah, and then ended up getting the job and moving back to Houston after college, which my parents were thrilled
I bet. I
by.
bet they were.
Yeah, and they convinced me to live for a year with them, right out of school, which, I saved a lot of money
Yeah.
doing that, but I'm not sure if I would recommend that to anybody. If you have the financial wherewithal to live separately from your parents, I would probably recommend that. Just because, like, I only really needed a bed to sleep in during that first year in banking. Like, you're working hard, you don't
Yeah.
really get to enjoy the niceties of a separate apartment really in that first year, or for a few years after that. But I felt like I put a lot of stress on my parents because they were, seeing me come home at like 2 or 3 in the morning,
Yeah.
and they really were questioning what I was doing with my life. And my dad would stay up for that long, so
Oh
it
my
wasn't good
God.
for his health either to have me in the house.
That's funny. So, how long were you at Tudor Pickering and Holt?
I was there until end of 2021. So 7 years.
So, what was it like during COVID to work for a company like that? Because obviously, I feel like this is just sort of one of those moments in time where oil goes negative, and it was everything shut in and nobody's drilling. And here you are thinking, oh man, I'm going to change the world. We're going to do all these big deals, right? And then all of a sudden, that just doesn't happen. Those disappear, and the patch is in disarray. What was that like?
I mean, I think it was like, um, so I think that there were a lot of like interesting things that happened during that time with deals. Um, you had, um, you had more of a focus on, just distressed assets, distressed deals,
Yeah,
um, bankruptcy situations, which doesn't come, frequently with the oil and gas industry. So it was kind of a learning experience for the entire firm on how to better position the firm on those deals. And so it was interesting from that perspective. There was sort of an existential crisis, um, across, I think the entire industry, just like
yeah,
you want to be in oil and gas if oil is going to be $30 a barrel for forever.
yeah.
um, And it did slow down deals a little bit, which honestly, as a junior analyst, you're kind of thankful for because it gives you some more time to go to bed and sleep
Yeah.
um, and have a life. Um, but yeah, for me, I think it made me think more about um, like you know energy longer term, um, and it kind of brought the initial questions around alternative energy and um, other energy sources for me. But at the time, I think it was kind of like a once in a generation type of thing that happened in the energy industry that was happening right now. So I kind of felt like I was in this cool period
Yeah.
of the energy industry where I could see a lot of things that were happening that hadn't happened in a really long time. So it was just interesting um, for the most part.
I mean, that's one way to look at it. I think at the time it was, I mean, I'm in sales, right? So nobody was buying software, like oil and gas software. They're like, look, man, like I don't even know if I'm gonna have my job. We're trying to survive. I can't get the group consensus for anything because we're used to being in the office all the time. Now we're not. We don't even know how to use a Zoom meeting. Like there was some like real um, philosophical shifts going on, and I think what started to happen coming out of that, and you saw this as closely as anyone, is okay, if something like this happens again or the next downturn happens again and we have to lay off 30% of our staff, we're not going to be able to just backfill those people. We have to figure out how to hyperscale using technology. And I think that's really carried through and part of why, my business continues to see a lot of different innovators come to us, whether it be on the AI tech side, the production optimization, better insights into data, real time data, as well as like holistic, longer term data. But I think when you first hit my radar, you were actually doing like tech investments for TPH. Is that right? That was some
Yeah,
of your focus there? Yeah.
yeah. So that the downturn, like you said, like incentivized a lot of folks to think about like what's the future of energy. How do we, generate energy better? And in part, that was like that spurred a movement to think about how do we optimize current energy assets? Like how do we put technology to work? Technology meaning like mostly software, mostly digital technology
Yeah.
that's easier to deploy, a lot of times cheaper, um, and faster to build. How do we build these solutions and deploy these solutions to quickly like make energy sustainable at this lower price point?
Sure.
And so that led to TPH starting this energy technology practice back in I would say 2017 ish. And at the time, I had actually moved to research, so I wasn't part of that initial effort in banking. But they wanted somebody to write about energy tech. So I started writing little blurbs in the morning newsletter about digital oil field and energy technology and all the different aspects around it. Um, and that's how I got into kind of the VC world too. And I remember one of the very first interactions I had um, was was with Chevron Technology Ventures,
Yeah.
and I remember sending a list of questions to Kamal about like like so how how do you guys invest? Like, what is like, you know, what is like a series? I don't know, some basic questions about VC. And he just like wrote back. He was very nice. He wrote back a list of answers, but he was also like, it seems like you're very green in this space.
Oh man. Hey.
Yeah.
Welcome to oil and gas.
But that's how I kind of learned about it was just starting to write about it and getting to know folks in that space, and learning as I go.
Yeah. And you were new to it, but at the same time, like I could see you building your presence on LinkedIn, right? You had a level of expertise. You weren't afraid to write. So I think you kind of carved yourself out a niche as a bit of a thought leader in the energy tech, oil and gas tech space. And then ultimately you decided like, I want to do this on my own, right? And I think that coincided with your move to Denver. So like talk me through that a little bit. What's it been like? What's your company? What do you do? What's it like being an entrepreneur? And how did this all coincide with like, okay, I'm leaving the full-time world. I know what I want to do. I want to move to Denver. I want to start my own company. Give me all of that.
Yeah, well, it also coincided with the fact that there were more engagements coming in that were more climate tech,
Yeah.
and new energy and alternative energy, than like energy optimization, digital oil field, and energy tech. So I started to think more about those spaces. They scared me at first. Like I had no idea what to think about hydrogen.
Yeah.
And luckily we had Gary Morris and John Gibson on our team, who both great mentors who just were very intellectually diverse, if you can say, and were able to 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 give me a good primer on some of these. But yeah, I left at the end of 2021 because I'd been in banking for 7 years. Um, well, at the firm for 7 years, and banking for a little less than that. But I wanted to figure out if there was something that I could build in this
Yeah.
arena. I had observed that there was a lot of inquiries that came in that we just like couldn't handle from a volume perspective, because a lot of times we're making introductions, we're handling work in a very manual way, and not very not very tech enabled. And so I was wondering
Yeah.
if there was something I could build that would be like kind of the crux of that could connect investors with startups in the energy technology space and create a whole platform around it. And so I kind of left to do some soul searching, kind of left to just try my hand, because there was really no better time in my life too. There really is no better time in my life than right now to pursue kind of this dream of being like on my own and
Yeah.
independent, and some form of entrepreneurship, um, and to try out this idea. And the idea quickly became not, kind of fizzled out. And that was because it became clear that there was like, it was more of a tool than anything else.
Yeah.
And there really wasn't a business that you could build around
Oh, I
it.
remember this. Right. God, it's got to be at
It
least
was ages ago.
yeah,
Yeah.
2.5 years. I mean, yeah, you were talking about the platform that you were building. So I guess you decided to ultimately scrap that, right?
Yeah.
Sounds
Yeah.
like.
Yeah, so I tabled that. I'm still really interested in it, and maybe in the GPT world, it's much easier to build.
Maybe.
But I tabled it at the time because I just got lukewarm responses from investors, mostly, that I had in my hypothesis pictured as being the buyers of this technology, and so I
Yeah.
decided that it wasn't worth pursuing. So I started writing about climate tech. I just wanted to learn. So that was part of my soul searching too, was just to learn more about climate tech, be smarter in that area,
Yeah.
meet more people outside of Houston too, which, like, in the energy tech bubble at the time, at least now it's different, but at the time, like, you really get, um, just fill your time up with meeting people inside Houston talking about energy tech and not really venturing outside the bubble.
Totally.
And
You could just go to Digital Wildcatter's office and sit in the couch all day and meet like 7 or 8 different energy tech companies. Just being there.
exactly. Yeah, which is great. But I also wanted to see what else was out there.
Yeah.
So leaving the firm also helped me kind of do that, because I think I separated myself out from an entity that was based in Houston, that was energy and mostly oil and gas focused, et cetera, et cetera. Moved to Colorado, started writing about all this random stuff, and just started meeting a whole bunch of people. And in that process, I wrote about first of a kind. So this risk of like standing up first facilities and first assets.
Mm-hmm.
And that got a lot of feedback. It actually kind of blew up, and got me a lot of unsolicited like connections and actually unsolicited projects. So that's how I started consulting around this, was that a project came in off of the article, and I took it on,
Hmm.
and then that led to another one. And so over the last 1.5 years, I've been consulting around this first of a kind. Actually, close to 2 years now. Now that I think about it, I've been consulting around this first of a kind, but actually formalized all of these efforts at the beginning of this year with the creation of B1 Climate Solutions.
Nice. Do you okay, so that the name now makes more sense to me. Do you have a team? Is it just you? Like how's your company structured?
It's just me. Um, it's just me for now. Um, I am looking to expand it
Okay.
eventually. It's kind of nice working by yourself, though.
Oh
I don't
my
know how
God.
you feel. Um, I know you have a team, but you kind of also work on a lot of things solo. And it's kind of nice to, when you're building something up, to just have that flexibility and not have to worry about, meeting payroll and all these things. Um,
Thanks for the reminder, by the way.
but but yeah, right now it's just me, and then if I need more people on projects, I'll pull in different collaborators,
Yeah.
which gives me flexibility to take on more than I can handle, but also means that I don't have to worry too much about payroll.
Yeah, it's just you, right? And I don't think you have any kids yet, right? So you're able to manage things. You don't. So you're able to manage things a little bit more differently, probably take on some risk. I'm with you. Yes, I think the hardest part about running a business is what you just outlined. It's the people management, keeping them motivated, ensuring that they're not staying stagnant in their career. Everybody has their personal issues and challenges, and I'm very aware of that. Making payroll, having a conversation that's like very strategic with your clients one day, and then later that day being like, "Hey, dude, can you pay your 2 month overdue invoice? By the way."
Yeah.
So it provides a different set of challenges than if I was doing it on my own. I think I like it because it allows me to get exposed to more things, but it also takes me out of my comfort zone. And I was an employee at W2 for 17 years or something, 15 years. And then all of a sudden you're running your own thing. There's just a different set of challenges. The paycheck doesn't just come in twice a month, right? And you have to deal with personalities, both in terms of your clients and oil and gas operators and your own internal people. Your time starts to slip away a little bit more. It was probably the most fun when it was just me, but it was also, I think, the most tenuous. Like it's a little bit more predictable now. And I have people like you saying, "Hey, here's an innovator. Jeremy, you should talk to them. I think you can help them." And you've brought me some awesome, awesome clients. So forever grateful for that. Um, in terms of the climate tech stuff, is your focus? You mentioned like sort of that V1, that first project. Is this truly for geothermal, hydrogen, methane monitoring projects, or is this also dealing with the software piece of this and helping them get their first foothold in a market?
Yeah, it's hardware.
Okay.
And it's the hard tech assets, because the um, the premise or the thesis is that there really isn't smart capital that's devoted to hard tech, and particularly in this stage
Yeah.
of the missing middle of like bridging this gap between R&D and technology development and full commercialization, like infrastructure deployment. Um, and there are some companies that have software aspects, but it's really around the equipment, the hard stuff,
Yeah.
that there is this gap in capital. So that's what I'm focused on.
Nice. Nice. How do you get your business?
Yeah, mostly word of mouth right now.
Yeah.
I also people have started to know me in this space,
Yeah.
because I have been consulting around it for about 2 years. And at the beginning, starting at the beginning of this year, when I formalized V1, I started to do a bunch of events around first of a kind. So actually trying to build out the community in the space. And that's led to not only more people knowing about V1, but also some leads on projects. So I'm pretty excited about that. I'm still looking to, I mean, I don't know if the business will ever, it will stabilize, but I guess I don't know at what point that will be, because there's so much evolution that's happening first of kind right now. It's hard to stabilize and figure out like what your product is going to be to this space when there's just so much that's changing in the space. Um, so I'm figuring out like what exactly is my product that I want to sell forever. Um, and there's no clear answer to that right now. Um, I basically offer kind of a mix of like financial and strategic consulting, depending on what the project is that comes in. Um, but there's no like definitive service that I would say is like a niche or like
Yeah,
a core product.
it's case by case basis, right? With the project work that you're doing. And I want to talk specifically about some of the projects that I'm seeing and see if these have hit your radar. Like I think one of the things that's really fascinating and interesting to me is, so utilities companies are now trying to put a mandate out there to say, like, we want to power our utilities with a greener mix of energies, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that could mean more geothermal, it could mean hydrogen, it could be a natural gas focus and getting more away from coal. But seeing these companies then kind of collaborate with some operators and say, okay, like we want more geothermal. So now you have an operator like a Chevron or ExxonMobil or something saying, okay, we want to get into geothermal too. So now we need to quickly figure out like where do we drill for this and then get this to the utility, right? In a means that gets us an extended contract and makes us look more favorable in the eyes of both the investor as well as the utility company. So seeing some like really cool stuff with that, and the same thing for data centers, right? We're seeing data centers being built all over the place all the time right now, especially with compute and AI coming into the fold. And those, wanting to power the data centers with a different mix of energy production. So curious if you're seeing some of those things. Like, are those some areas that you would dabble in as well, or am I off base?
Yeah, those are definitely areas. So I would say like my focus area or my niche right now is like first of a kind, but especially in industrial decarb. So like big assets, big plants, and in this industrial space, that can be anything from carbon capture, geothermal, hydrogen, green steel, green cement,
Yep.
like all of these industrial areas. Um, and yeah, there's definitely a trend towards there's an aspect of the corporates standing up more projects by themselves, like internally, right? And there's the whole data center boom that's leading to more renewables deployment, and
Yep.
then also other technologies associated uh, with with those mega centers. So finding baseload power for those data centers, figuring out how you can how you cool those data centers, figuring out like how when you're connecting electricity assets to the data center, like what sorts of technology you use to connect that electricity in. Like, do you store it then transfer it? Do you use a superconducting cable? Like, I know there's a big effort around that right now. So this sort of theme has led to so many different technologies um, being deployed around these first of a kind projects, which is really,
Yeah.
really cool.
Yeah, it's super cool, and it's nice to hear the things that were just cool sounding now actually be applied in practice, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that that's been the biggest shift, at least over the last, I'd say, 4 or 5 years. Is, oh yeah, yeah, that sounds cool. This green cement thing. All right, yeah. But now it's like, hey, we actually really need to do that,
Yeah.
and then taking it a little bit more seriously and seeing companies like that get more funding. I've said this on previous podcasts as well, but I think that at least in traditional oil and gas tech, but I would say in climate tech too, there's been a shift toward innovation more. So it's no longer just like we have a better, cheaper mousetrap, which is nice. There's always going to be room for those players, but it's like true innovation. Like my call after this with PaintJet, I had Nick, the CEO, on this podcast a few weeks ago. They have an AI painting robot. And yeah, of course, that sounds super cool. But what else? Okay, well, it saves money, it saves time, but it's also less emissive than traditional paint because it's more precise in terms of how it does its strokes. So there's always like other elements where, yeah, neat, cool. But now we're seeing the energy industry start to adopt things like that. And it's like, there's not a lot of competition for that yet. There probably will be over time, but for now, there's not. So seeing some kind of first of a kind things in our world too, which I love because it's just it, you think about at a happy hour, like when you try to describe what you do and what I do, it's hard, right? You can't really put it in a nutshell. People are like, I'm sorry, I totally don't understand. But if you can make it something that's like applicable to them and the real world, I think people are like, oh, I understand that. Which I'm like, yes, not just
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm selling you a better mousetrap for production optimization. Like, I don't understand. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Right. So really cool to see things evolve, and I think you're really at the tip of the spear with that. So, going to have you on again to talk about the evolution of these sorts of things. I want to put you on the hot seat with some questions right now.
Okay.
Didn't prepare you for these, but that's my favorite part. I think one is any advice you would give to your younger self, knowing what you know now, to tell the 21-year-old version of Deanna Zhang, or advice to somebody that's looking to get into oil and gas, energy tech, climate tech right out of school?
Yeah. So I would say the most beneficial thing that I've done in my entire career is to write. Like I always recommend anybody that I talk to that's kind of thinking about like next steps, trying to get into a new area, to write, even if nobody reads it. Nobody read my stuff for a really long time.
Yeah.
But eventually somebody will read it and it'll do so much for you. And it's also kind of a record of what you've learned, keeps you disciplined on learning and putting your thoughts in sort of a good enough structure at least to write about. I would also say advice to myself: get more organized. I'm paying for it now in so many ways,
Yeah.
but like every connection that came in earlier on, I just wish that I had a beautiful working CRM right now that I could search through and find conversations from like 5 years ago and be
Right.
able to reconnect with that person, et cetera. And so for anybody that is starting their career out in this space and starting to like really network, like I would encourage you to just get organized on that really early because I'm having to do that retroactively now, and it's such a pain.
Yeah. Especially if you're a big networker like you are, right? Like
Yeah.
I think and there's nobody forcing you to be accountable to put that in a CRM when you work for yourself. So it's kind of up to you. I will say I used to be really good at that, and now I'm terrible at it because it's just so many. And I think it's hard too with this advent of these video meetings where you're just going from one to the next. Like it didn't used to be like that. I remember back in the day, like occasionally I would do like a back to back lunch or a lunch right to a coffee or a lunch coffee demo, and I have to like think about everything that I did and conversations that I had that day. But it was a little bit more rare when it was face to face. It was like, okay, this is like my big face to face thing for today, or I have two
Today.
big face to face things today. And now I have like 7 or 8 of those online every day. And then I get to the end of the day and my brain's starting to get fried from staring at a screen. My kids need stuff from me and I'm tired. And I'm like, oh, I'll get to that tomorrow. Well, really, I should be following on this stuff today and like writing notes down into my CRM or a Google Sheet like right now. So I think that's
Exactly.
really salient advice, and it's a good reminder for me because and the annoying part now is like I'm of course like holding my team accountable to do just that while I'm not doing it myself. And it's like, I need to look in the mirror over that stuff. All right, transition a little bit to personal stuff. Are you a good skier, and where's your favorite place to ski here in Colorado?
I would say I'm a pretty decent skier these days. I started out not really having much ski experience back in 2018, and so it's been what 6 years now.
Yeah.
And so now I can hold my own on the mountain, and we might be starting backcountry next year, which is kind of exciting.
Oh, there you go.
But we usually ski in Ski Cooper. Actually, it's a small mountain near Leadville, Colorado, and we love it because there's no lines, and parking is so freaking easy, and there's enough of a mountain to where you can have a whole slope to yourself, and there's everything that you could possibly want in terms of, well, there's not like chutes and cliffs and stuff. But there's moguls, there's black runs, there's blue runs, green runs. Like there's everything that you could possibly want out of a mountain there.
That's funny
So,
because I've seen Ski Cooper before. I've never been. Our pass is at Copper. Sounds very, very similar. But I've seen like Ski Cooper come up. I'm like, what is this? Like, I've never
yeah,
even heard of this. There's so many like small resorts like that, that even Loveland, I've never been to Loveland. Some people swear by it, like especially locals. But I don't know. I think you sort of pick a mountain and roll with it. Like, especially with having kids now, for them, it's like utmost important for them to be comfortable. So they want to
yeah,
go places where they've been on runs before. So we've just kind of settled in on Copper. Like that's my resort. But I'll keep Ski Cooper in mind. It's probably cheaper as well than a $240
100%.
day pass
Yeah.
at Vail. Um, what's your favorite restaurant in Houston and your favorite restaurant in Denver?
Okay. So we love sushi and good sushi.
Yeah.
So in Houston, that's MF Sushi,
Okay.
hands down. Um, in Denver, that's Tamaki Den.
Tamaki
Um,
Den, not
it's
Sushi Den.
not Sushi Den, which is also very good,
Very
but
good.
Tamaki Den is like it's a little bit of a spin-off. I think they're technically separate, but one of the chefs from Sushi Den left and started Tamaki Den or something like that. And it's in Rhino, and it's great. It's also got a much more of a casual feel versus MF Sushi in Houston. They're both very good. Houston also has all sorts of Chinese food, so I have to
Oh
mention
yeah.
that. But uh, Mala Sichuan and Mama's Kitchen are probably the two of our favorites in Houston.
Yeah, I mean Houston, it's like I go down there and it's just like a festival of food basically every time I go. I love it. There's so many amazing restaurants, and the diversity of restaurants I think is something I would miss if I moved to Denver from Houston. But there's obviously other things that outweigh it, especially the weather and the traffic and the nature. The traffic in Houston is insane, and I feel like I'm struggling because I go down there a little bit less, in part because like now I'm paying for it.
Oh
Like when
yeah.
I was an
Hmm.
employee, it was a little bit different. I go on a
Right.
trip this week, I'll come back next week. Now I'm like, I really have to be judicious about when I go on my trips and like pack in everything. So there's been some trips where I'm like, in the back of an Uber from Hobby to downtown, and then I have to go out to the Galleria from there, and then I'm over in the Energy Corridor, and then I'm in the Woodlands, and then the next day I'm like in Sugarland. I'm like, oh my god, I'm spending 4 hours a day in an Uber when I'm
Right.
here. And with Houston traffic, it's nuts, right? And then I'm like, can you please turn the air conditioner up a little bit higher? You know?
Yeah. But the
um,
AC is amazing.
yeah, no, the best AC ever. But I'm actually headed down to Houston a couple times this month, and I'm looking forward to it because it's not quite as hot anymore.
It's a good
Um,
time of year to go right now.
yeah, yeah, everywhere. So, where can people find you? Like, if people want to reach out to you on social media, go to your website. Where are the best places to get a hold of you, Deanna?
Yeah. So I'm on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/Deanna-Zhang. My website also has a contact form, v1climatesolutions.com. And I'm around.
Yeah.
Especially if you're in Houston, I probably come down once a month or once every 2 months, especially for all the major events. So come find me there.
Love it. Deanna Zhang from V1 Climate Tech. You are a good one. I'm glad that you've chosen this industry, and I hope you keep putting the content out there. But thank you so much for coming on today.